Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western literary canon out loud. Today we are continuing in Life with Father. This story is entitled Father Sends Me to the World's Fair. And with that, I'll get started. Father and Mother and my brothers went out to the World's Fair in Chicago in 1893. I was finishing my freshman year at Yale, and by the time I got home, they had gone. Father had written me that I had better follow on and join them, but I couldn't. I had spent all my allowance. There would be no money coming to me until college opened again in September. In the meantime, I didn't even have car fare or money enough for tobacco. It wasn't this that bothered me, however, or not going out to Chicago. It was the fact that for the first time in my life, I had got deep in debt. I owed Warner Hall $42 for 7 weeks' board. I owed Dole for a heavy turtleneck sweater, and Debussy Men-Wearing and Company for ascot ties and shirts and a pair of pointed-toe shoes. I owed Hubleins for the round of drinks I had signed for on what had once seemed jolly nights. I was in debt to Stoddard the tobacconist for $60 or $70 for all sorts of fancy pipes. One of them was a meerschaum head of a bull with large amber horns. The total due to these and other tradesmen was nearly $300, and I didn't see how I could have been so reckless, or when I could ever pay up. Worst of all, my creditors, too, had become pessimistic. I borrowed a nickel for car fare from old Margaret after she had cooked me my breakfast, put a sandwich and a banana in my pocket, and went downstairs at once to Father's office to ask for a job. They didn't have any work for me down there and didn't want me around, but it was lucky I went, because while I was eating my sandwich, one of my creditors entered. He had come down to New York with a bundle of overdue bills to see whether he could collect any of them by calling upon his customers' parents. I was appalled. It had never occurred to me that anyone would come to Father's office like this. It seemed to me most underhanded. If Father had been there and I hadn't, I'd have been in serious trouble, for Father had warned me repeatedly to keep out of debt. I was thoroughly frightened, and I attempted to frighten that creditor. I said in a loud, shaky voice that if he was going to behave in this manner, I would never buy anything more from him as long as I lived. He said he was sorry to hear it, but he didn't sound very sorry. Times were bad, he explained, and he had to have money. I didn't believe him. Looking back, I realized that the long depression of the 90s had started, and banks were beginning to close, but I knew nothing about this at the time. I was preoccupied with my own troubles. These looked blacker than ever to me when my creditor said, as he left, that since my father was out, he would have to call on him again the next time he came to New York. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. I saw I must stick around Father's office for the rest of that summer. So as soon as he got back from the fair, I begged him to give me a job. I didn't need any vacation, I told him, and I would be getting a lot of valuable experience if he would let me go to work. After thinking it was over, he said that perhaps I could make myself useful as an office boy while his clerks were taking turns going on their vacations. I started the very next day at $4 a week. I might have got slightly better wages elsewhere, but I couldn't have made enough anyway to pay much on my bills, and the most important thing was not to make a few dollars extra, but to stand on guard at the door of Father's office to keep my creditors out. When I was sent out on an errand, I ran all the way there and back. When I was in the office, turning the big iron wheel on the letterpress, I always kept an eye on the grated window where the cashier sat at his counter to make sure that no old buzzards from New Haven were coming in to see Father. But late in the summer I got into trouble. The cashier told Father that I had taken hold better than he had expected, and that although I was not very accurate, I was punctual and quick, and seemed to be especially interested in getting down early. Father was so pleased that he sent for me to come into his inner office, and told me that he had decided I had earned a vacation. I said that honestly and truly a vacation was the last thing I wanted. He smiled at the immense pleasure I seemed to be taking in sealing envelopes and filling inkwells, But he explained that he wanted me to have some rest and recreation before college opened, and he added that he would advise me to go on to Chicago and see the World's Fair. I said I didn't care about seeing the fair. Father didn't quite like this. "I have just told you, Clarence," he said, "that I would advise you to go." I saw that he would regard it as disrespectful of me if I refused. I uncomfortably made a partial confession. I said I couldn't afford to go to Chicago. I didn't have any money. Father was surprised. "Well, what about your allowance?" he asked. "I'm sorry to say I've spent it all, Father." "That was very imprudent of you," he observed. I said in a low voice that I knew it. Father said that he hoped this would be a lesson to me to be more careful in future. By failing to exercise even the most ordinary prudence, he explained in his firm, friendly way, I had deprived myself of seeing a sight that might never come again in my lifetime. He said he felt badly about it. I didn't, however. I went back to working the letterpress. I liked to turn the big painted iron wheel and tighten the plates. We didn't use carbons. Instead, after writing letters by hand and copying ink or else on the typewriter, we pressed them down hard on damp tissue paper to make copies to file. It took a good deal of practice to do this correctly. If the tissue was too dry, the copy was so faint it could hardly be read. If I got it too wet, it made the ink run and smudged the whole letter. The next day, Father interrupted me at this interesting occupation again. He had had a long talk with Mother, it seemed, and as all the rest of the family had seen the fair, they wanted me to go too. He said that he would therefore help me out this once, and give me some money, and he asked how much I had saved from my wages. I had saved nearly all of them, as a matter of fact. I had spent less than $1 a week. Margaret had wrapped up little lunches for me, and my only other needs had been a haircut and car fares and a new pair of cuffs. But as I had been using all I saved to pay small installments to those men in New Haven, I had only 48 cents on hand. "Well, the devil," Father laughed disappointedly. "You have attended to your duties here faithfully enough, I suppose, but I see you have a damn lot to learn." I thought to myself that he knew little how much I was learning. He lit a cigar and looked at me reflectively. "Clarence," he said, "I think I should reproach myself afterward if I allowed you to miss seeing this fair. It is a great educational opportunity that may never recur, so I will make you a present of $100 to enable you to go to Chicago." "Thank you very much, Father," I said as he shook hands with me. "But if you wouldn't mind, I'd rather have the money, sir." Father frowned. I stood beside his desk waiting. $100 would be a magnificent windfall for me and my creditors. His reply killed my hopes. "I see no point in giving you $100 to fritter away as you have done with your other funds," he said. "If you don't choose to avail yourself of this educational—" "Oh, I do, sir," I said. If the only way to get that $100 was to go to Chicago and back, I saw that of course I'd better go. I felt sure I could save at least some of it to use in paying my bills. I went to the cashier and begged him to keep an eye out for my creditors and not let any of them in my absence. He said he would do all he could, but he wouldn't like to be caught surreptitiously keeping out callers. I argued that these people would annoy Father if they saw him and that they ought to be treated like book agents. But he said Father might regard their disclosures as important, however unwelcome, and that he couldn't keep anyone out who came on legitimate business. I almost gave up going at this, but Father and Mother were so eager to give me a treat that I couldn't. I had to pretend to be eager myself with my heart in my boots. I wrote to my creditors that I would begin paying my bills very soon and that I hoped they would wait. Father asked me what road I was getting a ticket on. He said that the lake shore was the best. I made some vague answer to that. I didn't like to tell him after he had been so generous to me that I had bought a cut-rate ticket to Chicago and back for $11 on an Erie special excursion. The Erie was so awful in those days that it was a joke. It didn't go nearly as far as Chicago, of course, but it had arranged for trackage rights over a number of other one-horse railroads for its special excursions. It took that train 3 days and 2 nights, if I remember correctly, to get to Chicago. We stopped at every small station. We waited for hours on sidings. Most of the time, I had very little idea where we were. The excursion wandered around here and there in various parts of this country and Canada, trying to pick up extra passengers. Of course, the train had no sleeping cars or diner, only day coaches. There was quite a crowd of us in them, men, women, and children. In the seat back of mine was a woman with 2 babies. I had my seat pretty much to myself, however, because the old man who sat with me spent most of his time in the smoker. I didn't go to the smoker myself. I had nothing to smoke. All the windows were open. It was so hot. We were coated with coal dust. The washroom got out of order and had to be locked. The little drinking tank was soon emptied. Most of us had nothing to eat, and we slept sitting up, but it was fun. Nearly everybody but the overworked trainman was good-natured and friendly. At every stop we'd all pile out of the car and bolt for the washroom in the station, or try to buy pie and sandwiches, and stand in line at the water cooler, and those of us who went dry at one stop would try again at the next. At a little place where the station was locked and there was no other building in sight, we had the best luck of all, because there was a pond near the tracks, rather yellow, but with plenty of water for everybody. I was rinsing my undershirt in it when the whistle blew, and I only just managed to scramble aboard the train as it started. The day before that, at a little place where the eating was good, several passengers who didn't run fast enough had been left behind. At Chicago, I hunted up a boarding house. As those near the fairgrounds were expensive, I went to the outskirts, where I found an old boarding house near the railroad, which was clean and decent. I sent off a postcard to Mother saying that the fare was simply fine and got a good bath and sleep. I went to the fair the next day. My boarding house was so far out that I had to go by train, but the fare was low and the station handy. And when I walked into the fairgrounds, I was deeply impressed. They were a wonderful sight. The vast buildings weren't solid stone, of course, and they wouldn't be there 100 years hence, but in the meanwhile they provided a vision of grandeur, at least for innocent eyes. The eyes, for example, of persons who had come on the Erie. I sat in the court of honor. I walked admiringly around the artificial lagoon. I sauntered through 1 or 2 of the exhibition halls and went back to my boarding house. On my next visit, I explored the grounds more thoroughly, and I was upset to find that all the places which I wanted to see most cost money. This was particularly true of the Midway Plaisance, a broad promenade lined with sideshows. There were Bedouins, a Ferris wheel, a fearsome canvas Hawaiian volcano, a wonderful captive balloon, and a quote-unquote Congress of Beauty. And there was also a real Dahomey village of genuine savages. I could reach out and touch them as they stalked about, scowling, and whenever I did, I could hear them muttering things to themselves. They occasionally danced in a threatening manner, uttering genuine war cries, and the guidebook said, "They also sell products of their mechanical skill." And what had excited the most talk in all the newspapers, there were dancing girls with bare stomachs who wriggled in what clergymen said was a most abandoned way right before everybody. I had heard much about these girls that I forgot all my vows to economize and went into their tent. They didn't come up to my hopes. I had already noticed in New Haven that such things never did. That night in my boarding house I counted my money, and I saw that if I had good times on the Midway, I'd have a bad time with creditors. My creditors won, and I didn't go back to the Midway again. There was a great deal else to see, however, and I saw nearly all of it, because it was free. But as Father had said, it was educational. I spent hours and hours roaming through the principal exhibits, which were supposed to be good for the mind. They were interesting, but monotonous. It was like visiting 100 museums at once. A few of these places fascinated me when I came to them fresh. The Krupp guns were better than anything on the Midway, but the showmanship wasn't. Herr Krupp had announced, by the way, that he was presenting the biggest gun of all to America for the defense of the great port of Chicago. These free exhibits increased my expenses some days. They'd made me so hungry I had a hard time trying to be economical at the White Horse Inn, I remember. This was a reproduction of an old English inn, swollen to an extraordinary size, and the big chops at the next table looked juicy and the steaks smelled delicious. and every time I went to the transportation building and got in a coma, I had to revive myself on beer and cheese afterward in a place called Old Vienna. Father had especially enjoined upon me the duty of studying the transportation exhibits, because he was an officer or director of several small railroads, and he hoped that by and by I might be too. It was quite an assignment. That building had 18 acres of floor space. It was built in the form of several large train sheds. The guidebook explained that, in style, it is somewhat Romanesque, and added that the ornamental color designs in 30 different shades of its exterior produce an effect almost as fine as embroidery. On rainy days, I didn't go to the fairgrounds. I sat in my boarding house and saved money. But this was dull, and I felt lonely, so I bought a chameleon for company. He wasn't much company. On the other hand, as the end of his tail had been broken off, he only cost 20 cents. He wore a chain with a little brass collar at one end and a pin at the other, and I stuck the pin in the window curtain to tether him and fed him live flies. I wanted to go home after a week of this, but I figured that I'd better not. Father might think I'd been too lavish with his money if it only lasted a week. So I stayed on for over a fortnight to inspire him with confidence in me and make him see that I wasn't always a spendthrift in spite of my bad freshman record. When I wasn't at the fair, I wandered around Chicago. There was something about Chicago I liked. It seemed bigger and busier to me than New York, and much fatter, much more spread out and roomy. At last, when I thought Father must surely be feeling that I had used up that $100, I packed my suitcase, pinned the chameleon to the lapel of my coat, and embarked again on the Erie. The chameleon had a miserable time on the train, and the rest of his tail got joggled off, but even so he was luckier than he knew, for we made much better time going east than we had made going west. I had gone away worried and alarmed, but I came home in triumph. No creditors had gone to the office, I learned, and I had saved $52 to send to New Haven. I hadn't brought home any presents for the family, but I presented the chameleon to Mother. Father and I had a little talk about what I had liked. "Did you see the Midway?" he asked. "I saw a little of it," I said cautiously. "Did you see it, Father?" "Yes," he said. "I was interested in those filthy Hottentots. How people can live in that disgusting manner I don't understand. I didn't know it was allowed." He was pleased when he found I had gone only once to the Midway and had apparently spent all the rest of my time in the right places. "Well," he finally said in approval, "I gather then that you found it was an educational experience for you." "Yes, Father," I told him. "I did." Father's old trousers. Father didn't care much for jewelry. He disliked the heavy watch chains which were worn by men of his time, chains with charms dangling down from the middle. His had none of these things on it. It was strong and handsome but simple. His studs and cufflinks were on the same order, not ornate like those then in fashion. His ring was a solid plain band of gold set with a rectangular sapphire. All these objects were regarded with a reverence which we felt was their due. There was a special sort of rightness about Father's things in our eyes, and we had a special respect for them because they were Father's. Father had had a lighter ring once, with a smaller sapphire which he had worn as a young man. He had discarded it as less suitable for him, however, as he got on in life, and it had been put away long ago in the safe in our pantry. Mother didn't like having it lying idle there, year after year. After I left college, she decided that I had better wear it, so that the family would get some good out of it once more. One afternoon, she and I went into the crowded pantry, with its smell of damp washcloths, and she took it out of the safe. I did not want a ring, but Mother presented this one to me with such affection that I saw no way to get out of accepting it. She put it on my finger and kissed me. I looked at the thing. The sapphire was a beautiful little stone. I thought that after a while I might learn to like it, perhaps. At any rate, there was nothing to get out of order or break. I soon discovered, however, that this ring was a nuisance. It was such hard work not to lose it. If I had bought and paid for it myself, I suppose I'd have cherished it, but as it had been wished on me, it was only a responsibility. It preyed on my mind. After a little while, I stopped wearing it and put it away. When Mother noticed that it wasn't on my finger, she spoke out at once. She said there wasn't much point in my having a ring if I merely kept it in my bureau drawer. She reminded me that it was a very handsome ring, and I ought to be proud to wear it. I explained that I couldn't get used to remembering that I was wearing a ring, and had several times left it on public washstands and got it back only by sheer luck. Mother was frightened. She instantly agreed that it would be a terrible thing to lose Father's ring. It went back into the safe in the pantry. Several years later, it was taken out again, and after another little ceremony, it was entrusted to George. He had even more trouble with it than I had. He too decided that he didn't wish to wear it himself, so as he had married, he gave it to his wife, who adored it. Everyone was happy for a while, until Mother happened to see Father's ring nestling on Wilhelmine's finger. Mother was very fond of Wilhelmine, but this strange sight disturbed her. She felt that the only right and appropriate use for that ring was for it to be worn by one of Father's sons. She asked George to take it away from Wilhelmine and return it. He silently did so, and back it went again into the pantry. It was a curious fact that everything that Father had ever owned seemed to be permanently a part of him. No matter what had happened to it, it remained impressed with his personality. This isn't unusual in the case of a ring, I suppose, but the same thing was true even of Father's old neckties, especially from his point of view. I don't think he cared what became of that ring, the way Mother did, but when he gave me an old necktie or a discarded pair of trousers, they still seemed to him to be his. Not only did he feel that way about it, but he made me feel that way too. He explained to me that he gave things which he didn't care about to the coachman or the Salvation Army. But when he had a particularly handsome tie which had plenty of wear in it yet, or a pair of trousers which he had been fond of, he saved anything of that sort for me. A pair of striped trousers which he had worn to church on Sundays for years went up to New Haven with me one Christmas when I was a junior, and as I was short of clothes at the time, they came in very handy. I had to be careful not to take off my coat while I was wearing them, though. They looked oddly baggy in the seat when exposed to full view, on nights when I was playing billiards in a pool room, for instance. They also made it harder for me to climb Osborne Hall's iron gate. This gate was 10 feet high with a row of long, sharp spikes at the top, and to get quickly over it in Father's trousers was quite a feat. There was no point in getting over it quickly. In fact, there was no point in getting over it at all. Osborne Hall was used solely for lectures, and we saw quite enough of it in the daytime without trying to get in there at night. Besides, we couldn't get in anyhow, even after climbing the gate, because the big inside doors were locked fast. After standing in the vestibule a minute between the doors and the gate, there was nothing to do but climb back again and go home to bed. This seemed like a useful or stimulating performance, though, when we had been drinking. On nights like these, as I was undressing in my bedroom, I sometimes had moral qualms over the way that I was making Father's trousers lead this new kind of life. Once in a while, such misgivings would even come over me elsewhere. They were not clear-cut or acute, but they floated around in the back of my mind. Usually I paid little attention to what clothes I had on, but when I did happen to notice that I was wearing those trousers into places which were not respectable, I didn't feel right about it. Then one week I lent them to a classmate of mine, Jerry Ives, to wear in his role of a fat man in some Sci-U play. Father wasn't fat, but he was much more full-bodied than Jerry, and there was plenty of room in his trousers for a pillow, and Jerry besides. I thought no more of the matter until the night of the play. But when the curtain went up and I saw Father's Sunday trousers running across the stage pursued by a comic bartender who was yelling, "Stop, thief!" I felt distinctly uncomfortable. After that, nothing seemed to go right with them. The fact was, they simply didn't fit into undergraduate life. The night that I most fully realized this, I remember, was when a girl, whom Father would have by no means approved of, sat on what was my lap, but his trousers. Father was a good 80 miles away and safely in bed, but I became so preoccupied and ill at ease that I got up and left. This is the end of Part 8 of Life with Father by Clarence Day. In the next video, we will proceed to the next story entitled Father Lets in the Telephone. Thank you for listening.